First of all, we're going to start a push review, obviously. What we're going to do first today is we're going to look at Supreme Court cases. They're important because usually a Supreme Court case is when something has happened that the Constitution is vague on. Okay? The Constitution is either vague or the Constitution needs a ruling. Okay? So that's why court cases are important. When something happens in American history and there's not a ready-made solution, everybody runs back to Mama. And Mama is the Constitution. Okay? So, let's go ahead and get started. Okay? Okay? Okay. The first group is going to be the Marshall Court. This is a biggie because this is the first court. Okay? Anytime something is the first, it's going to set a precedent. The Supreme Court is all about precedent. Marshall Court is a favorite of AP questioners, okay? And here's the reasons why. And whether you want to write this down, it depends on you, but just keep this in mind. Because the Marshall Court, this is John Marshall, who's the Chief Justice, because his court is the first one to deal with constitutional issues, okay? Everything the Marshall Court does sets a precedent because it's the first, okay? The major issue that the Marshall Court will have to decide upon is that federalism. Remember, a federal government shares governing power between the national government and state governments. The Constitution is vague on this. The only thing the Constitution says is the 10th Amendment. Anything that's not expressly given to the national government is reserved to the states. But you don't have any delineation of what that means. So court cases are going to line out exactly what that means. It's going to determine which issues are state issues and which issues are federal issues. So the whole genesis of the Marshall Court is going to be finding. It's been finding out what federalism is. Okay? All right. First one, maybe the most important of all of them. This one is not going to determine, okay, the limits of federalism. This is going to determine exactly what the Supreme Court does, what its role is. The Constitution doesn't specifically say what the role of the Supreme Court is. This court case will. Okay? Anybody remember what this one is about?
Judicial review.
Yeah, exactly. Very good, Bergen. This is about judicial review, okay? And guys, this is something, just to let you know, okay? Judicial review, simply put, is the right of the Supreme Court to judge the constitutionality of laws passed by Congress. It is one of those checks and balances, okay? Okay? It's one of those checks, I need a director here. It's one of those checks and balances, okay? So anytime Congress passes a law that might be unconstitutional, the Supreme Court jumps in and does. This gives them a reason for being. This took them from being the weakest of the three branches to being the most powerful of the three branches. Okay? So like it says right here, it's the engine that drives the court. Without judicial review, the Supreme Court does nothing.
And we've taught it before, like a little acronym is M&M's equals Jolly Ranchers. M&M's equal Jolly Ranchers. So Marbury versus Madison equals JR for judicial review.
Oh, okay. I just struggled with that one.
M&M's
Pretty
equal
good.
Jolly Ranchers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's better than the open door policy when you open the China cabinet. Okay, anyway, okay. That's not bad. Okay, everybody got that? Does everybody understand the M&M Jolly Ranchers thing? Because I'm just now processing it. Okay. Okay, this next one is going to determine the limits of federalism. Okay? It's McCulloch versus Maryland. Guys, when you study these things, a good way to study it is learn the first word in the court case. Marbury, McCulloch, okay? Because if you know that, that's an easy way to keep this in mind. Also, remember we've told you guys all year long to find one word that helps identify what it is, okay? Well, the word up here is M&M's Jolly Ranchers, okay? Is judicial review, okay? What would be the word for McCulloch versus Maryland? First of all, think to yourself, what's it about? This is that awkward silence. Okay.
It's been a while.
It's about the bank. It's about Hamilton's Bank. Okay? So that's the one thing. So if you know it's about the bank, that will help guide you. Okay? Especially if you're answering a multiple choice question. If you know it's about the bank, that answer choice has got to have something to do with the bank. Okay? Okay. Don't write this down yet, listen for a second. This is what happened. You have to write this down, just listen, okay? The state of Maryland had a state bank, okay? But the Bank of the U.S. also had a bank in Maryland. The Bank of the United States is more powerful, it has more income, more assets and things like that, okay? So therefore, the Bank of the State of Maryland can't compete against it. They're businesses, okay? So what the state bank wants to do is to tax the U.S. bank. When the U.S. bank has to pay that tax, they've got to raise their interest rates, and they can compete, okay? The ultimate goal is this. If you tax the Bank of the United States, you can tax them out of existence. Okay? So when this went to the court, this is what Marshall decided. Okay? The first thing is, an agency of the state cannot tax an agency of the federal government. No matter what it is. Okay? A state agency cannot tax a federal agency. And the reason he said was this: the power to tax is the power to destroy. This is going to curb any type of predatory behavior by state agencies against the federal government. Okay? And guys, when it says this is about the bank, that's specifically what it's about. But the overall web thing is huge. Any federal agency cannot be taxed by any state agency. Okay? Is everybody good so far? Everybody good so far? If you have any questions, be sure and ask. Okay?
And this also reestablishes the federal government's dominance over states.
That is
Because we're
yeah.
still new in a country, and there's still issues over state versus federal power. So this is just reestablishing.
Right. And guys, the overall trend, that's a good point. The overall trend of all of these court cases is to establish the federal government as predominant over state governments. John Marshall was more of a Federalist than Hamilton was. He was a Federalist on steroids. He was proud to say he was a Federalist even after the Hartford Convention. Okay? And a Federalist always supports the power of the federal government. Okay? So the key thing about the Marshall Court is they will reinforce the federal government as being supreme over the states. All of them will do that. Okay? Gibbons. This is a biggie because you hear about this one all year long. Anybody want to hazard a guess? This is one we've talked about since we first talked about it earlier on. Okay? You've read about it a couple times in the readings.
Interstate commerce.
Exactly. Thank you, Bergen. Interstate commerce. Dude, you don't make a 5 on this test. My foot's going up your butt. That's all you're doing. Okay, listen carefully. That's right. You don't need to know specifics of these things. All you need to know is this, okay? Remember, Marshall wants to establish the federal government as supreme. So what he's saying when it comes to interstate commerce, commerce that crosses state lines, the federal government has the right to regulate it. Okay? That's what it means right there. If you fast forward, and just think for a second, remember in the Gilded Age, Munn versus Illinois? Okay? The reason that was important is Munn versus Illinois challenged this. Munn's saying that, yeah, we got a railroad that could cross the state lines, and we understand it's the Fed's regulatory property, but inside the state of Illinois, these railroad barons are strangling us because they're charging too much for grain and things like that. So we claim that if you have a concern inside the state, like railroad rates, that the state should have a right to regulate them. Okay? And the court agreed. But remember, it was a half-breed court. Okay? So the court agreed, and that took a chunk out of this. 11 years later, when you had a stalwart court, you had Wabash versus Illinois. And Wabash reinstated this. Okay? So this will be challenged. It'll be challenged from time to time. And guys, the reason is this. States don't want anything passing through their state being regulated by anybody other than themselves. The states want to control everything within their state. This says that crosses the state line, states keep your hands off of it. Okay, so that's what's important about this. Okay, hey, Mary. Okay. Because everybody gets so far. Okay. Give me a word. Indians. Okay, this is right here, okay? What this is saying is this, okay? That even though Indian tribes live within the separate states, okay, they are considered sovereign nations by the federal government. And the states do not have the right to conduct foreign affairs with foreign nations. Only the federal government does. So what Worcester says is this, that when you deal with an Indian tribe, only the federal government can deal with it. The reason is the state of Georgia was trying to evict the Cherokee. Okay, their reservation was on, or their village was on prime cotton farming land. And the state of Georgia tried to evict them. Okay? Well, they appealed to the Supreme Court. And Marshall said the state of Georgia can't evict anybody. Only the federal government can do that. Okay? So Worcester is going to establish federal control over Indian tribes. Okay? So, if the state of Georgia could not evict them, who did?
Jackson.
Andrew Jackson. And Jackson is the President of the United States, which means he's a federal official. Okay? That's what the Indian Removal Act was. Okay, everybody get so far? Okay, guys, that's all of these, okay? When you look at these together, just keep in mind this general thing right here, okay? The Marshall Court is going to establish which issues are the property of the federal government, which issues are the property of the states. Listen carefully. He did not settle that issue 100%. It is still a hot-button issue today. Every time something happens, people appeal to the Supreme Court. Okay, Supreme Court, is it a state issue? Is it a federal issue? Typically speaking, and this is for essay, okay? Republicans want powers returned to the states. Typically speaking, Republicans want to see power returned to the states. And they're saying if we take these powers and rights and put them back on the states, that way the states can fund them and the federal government doesn't pay for them. Democrats typically want these powers given back to the federal government. Okay? So that's just kind of an overall thing in case you see something like that on an essay. Things like that on an essay is what gets you extra points. It comes under that category of outside information. Okay? That's why we drop these things on you all the time. Okay? Is everybody get so far?
Okay.